So, ladies and gentlemen, looking forward, of course, to some amazing ports of call this cruise. You have Florence, Pisa, Livorno tomorrow, but ahead of that, of course, some amazing ports of call to visit. And to talk them through with you this evening, please give a very warm welcome to Captain Richard Heyman.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Paul. And thanks for the wizard behind the curtain here who fixed this. I was just preparing to come out here and my computer went on an update. It's sort of like your best friend leaving you at a party. And so it was grinding away looking for the internet, which it didn't find. But meanwhile, we're back in sight here. And by introduction, I'm a still active duty merchant marine officer with a U.S. Coast Guard license, and I work on various ships in various ways, but it's always a great pleasure. Every couple of times a year I get to come out on Regent to see the world with you and go to places that may be new or may be quite familiar. And of course, Italy is I would call it the center of its own universe. Sort of like every place else is too, but except that Italy has so much importance in history and contemporary culture and current politics and the arrangement and future of Europe and the world that whenever you come back to Italy, you're refreshing what is actually perhaps an experience that is more ancient than yourself. Now, I don't know if we have actually any Italians in the audience or Italian Americans or descendants of the greater ages of Italy, but I live in New York, where it's a very Italian region, let's say, and with our mayor, our governor, and our chief prosecutor, all of Italian heritage. So we're, at least in that part of the United States, we're used to the constant, the bellicose arguing, which is actually a wonderful thing. I come from Scottish, Irish ancestry, and when I was a kid, I remember going to visit my Italian heritage friends, and the families were always so big and so raucous, and everybody is laughing and screaming and yelling and the whole thing, and I'd go home, and my own family seemed rather quiet. I didn't know what the problem was. Maybe it's the lack of sunshine or the right wine. But anyway, I have been to Italy since I was a little kid, and I ended up working here, and I travel around. Now as a sailor, I go to all of the different ports. And just for this trip, I'm here with you just to Venice, and so I have the pleasure of sort of presenting them somewhat and looking for things I don't know, and actually going to a couple of places that I have not been, I should say, because Regent tends to go look for places where the bigger ships aren't, and maybe you haven't been before. So there's always a surprise wherever you come out to the sea, and particularly on this ship. But I'm going to give you a kind of a sweep through the Tyrrhenian Sea here to look at where we are going, and a few places we won't get to, just to give you a view of it. But of course, you saw those big ferries and all the people lording onto them and loading and taking their cars and then invading the islands of both Sardinia and Sicily and all the other little islands. So the summertime is on, and you see all this kind of traffic and people coming just across. Now, it's back in the old days, that was a day or many days sea voyage to get to Sardinia. And now you have these fast ferries and airplanes, and the place is no longer isolated like it used to be. It used to be considered the wildest island off of Italy, in that it had its own indigenous people, it had its own fortresses and kingdoms, and going way back into prehistory, Sardinia was considered a place where only the brave would go, and of course the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Romans and everybody had a little claim on it. But to this day, Sardinia, the Sardis, they call themselves, will say, we're not really Italian, we are forced to be part of Italy. Well, almost every other part of Italy has the same opinion. All those other people, they're not real, we're the real people. Well, anyway, you can enjoy that as we go around. But Sardinia, because of its isolation and lack of industrial development and population, has always been a rugged mountain with a lot of forests and agriculture, and now a lot of national parks. So it's become sort of the recreational outlet for the mainland of Italy, people come over for just a day or a week, or do a lot of hiking and adventure sports like mega yachts. Now we're going to this port, Olbia, where it is the old port of, actually goes back to Greek times, but since the 1960s, it's been a famous resort area called the Costa Smeralda, the Emerald Coast, and famously, Aga Khan bought up a bunch of the land and built the first resort, so it's become a very fashionable, expensive, and chic place. So wasn't quite that way back when they had to defend it. This is one of the Castello de Torre on the other coast of Sardinia. And all through the countryside and in all the towns are ruins upon the ages, going back again to, this is a Roman aqueduct in Olbia. We'll probably see that on a trip. This is a prehistoric sacred well, they call it, which they don't know who built it. There are a lot of structures in Sardinia that are so old that they can only estimate they are 3,000, 5,000, maybe even 10,000 years old, because there were megalith builders, sort of like Stonehenge and other places. That was a well also. And up in the countryside, there are the beautiful lakes and the mountains. Much of the island, of course, has been deforested like most of the Mediterranean, but it's still fairly lush, a lot of grazing, olive growing, the typical Mediterranean produce. But they have an unusual strain of donkey, which they're not actually albino, but they all look like ghost donkeys. There's herds of them up in the mountains. Another product is cork trees. You can see they strip the cork off of the bark for the wines that still get a cork. But it's a beautiful country with such high mountains. You get snow-capped peaks, and you actually have skiing up in the upper regions of Sardinia. So you can imagine when you're back on foot and on horseback, this was impossible country to get through. And then if you were in it, it was often full of bandits. And so it was worth your life to go up into the mountains of Sardinia, they say. Nowadays, it also has the European Space Station monitoring tower, which is sort of a reflection of the other previous towers, which were scattered in all the little valleys and villages of Sardinia, called the nuraghi, which are these stone conical towers that, again, are prehistoric. They don't really know who built them because there was no writing and no evidence of them. They were just described by the Greeks when they first came there. And there probably were watchtowers and sort of fortresses to protect every town, and then alongside an ancient church. But there are thousands of them around Sardinia. There's similar structures in Majorca, Minorca, and a few in Sicily, but Sardinia has a sort of mythical inheritance of construction of people they don't know. I mean, this could look like a Mayan temple. Of course, you go into archaeology and prehistory studies, there are a lot of similarities around the world of what ancient peoples built and whether they might have had contact or trade. Sardinia, being in the middle of the Mediterranean, though, certainly had trade with the coastline and the other islands, and it was part of the great Phoenician trade routes going back about 3,000 years ago. But this predates even the Phoenicians. This is called the Grave of the Gods, which is about a 10-meter high stone with no inscriptions on it, but it circles around to obviously a ceremonial ground where we don't know what they did. There's no record of any of these people or what their religion was, but it was precursors to contemporary culture. But they say if you go to Sardinian villages in pre-Lenten Carnival, they have all kinds of music and dancing that they don't know where it came from. They just keep doing it. It probably dates back again to prehistory, and nowadays they continue to find more of the archaeology. This is Sunarax up in the central Sardinia, which is a Neolithic village with the remains of their stone houses. This is a nearby mortuary. So they cut into the stone graves, and they again are not well dated. They're 3,000 to 4,000 years old, but there's no organic remains to test, they say. Well, then the rest of the world came to Sardinia. The Phoenicians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Again, it was not a very easily managed land because there's almost no good flatlands. By contrast, Sicily has beautiful broad valleys that have a lot of agriculture. But the Romans and the Greeks, then they established their towns and trading posts anyway. So there are the remains of these. This is Tharos on the west coast of Sardinia. They built forums. I mean, we'll be seeing plenty of this wherever we go. The remains of the past are so extensive all through the Mediterranean here. Another a Roman thermal bath, and then a now Christianized temple to Saturn, the Roman god. So this is the heritage that Sardinia, sort of like much of the area, have, where one wave of history and different people and culture over the other. The main city is Cagliari, which is originally founded by the Phoenicians, built up by the Greeks, and then became a Roman center. That's the Roman name, Calaris in Latin. But that's the major city on the south tip of Sardinia to this day. And the Sardinians, in their various configurations, and they actually speak very different languages in the north, south, and central highlands, they were always being forced to become a part of another kingdom, whether it be Naples or whether it be Corsica or the ongoing invasions of Sardinia. In this case, they declared their independence in 1272 to try to become the independent kingdom of Sardinia, but of course they didn't have the power that other nearby nations at the time did, so it became within the sphere of particularly the Neapolitan Empire, but fought over with Genova and in the long tumult of history. Now this is modern Cagliari, which is now a modest size and a very Italian city. They don't speak the countryside Sardinian in Cagliari, for instance. But it's a beautiful bay and harbor. It's, of course, been enlarged and industrialized, so it's a fairly prominent center of the citadel city with a big, with the cathedral and the remains of various forts from various eras. This is the main walkway up into the overlook to the cathedral, where they have these sort of multiple archways, which are quite beautiful. And then guarding the main square area, there's this Torre del Elefante. You can see right on the edge of it, there actually is an elephant there, but not a really big one. That's where it got its name. But that's a typical medieval fortress to try to protect the heights from invaders. Meanwhile, the lower areas, they have the civic buildings and the plazas and squares, typical of an Italian city. Now, we're not actually going there. We're going up on the northeast corner where the resorts and beaches are, but I'll just show you a bit more of the culture of Sardinia, which is quite similar in its urban area to any comparable one in mainland Italy. This is the beautiful big library they have in Cagliari, and galleries and such. A local hero, Eleanor Borea Oristano, who resisted the Neapolitan king at one point. I mean, all of Italy is sort of drenched in ancient conflict, but meanwhile, the life goes on with the food and the drink and the. I mean, Sardinia is kind of an animated place. It has this curious flag, though, of what would be perhaps a Moor. Now, they had a lot of commerce with North Africa at times, but for some reason, Sardinia took that as their flag. And then you can see the different regions of the island. When you get into the north side, you start to get the language that's sort of mixed with Corsican, which is sort of mixed with French. So this is a sign up in the north of don't smoke, but it's sort of this Latinate mixed French and Italian language. And those who consider themselves indigenous Sardinians are mostly up in the countryside with, let's say, their own traditional costumes, which come out on festival days and during Carnival, and there are distinctive qualities. Now, these guys are representing the traditional banditti up in the mountains, so they come down to party in the town just to scare the tourists, I suppose. So you see this all over Italy. Every region has its own native costume and native lace and dress and pride and tradition. But meanwhile, they're all in, let's say, casual international clothing on a normal day. So that's a bit of a look at Sardinia. So I'm going to take us then, as our cruise schedule is, to the coast of Sorrento, south of Naples, and to Capri. I'll just show you some of the tours are going out to various places, but the main attraction, of course, of this area, if you haven't been, is Pompei. And this is the famous Roman city that was destroyed by Vesuvius and then buried and then discovered, and then they've continued to excavate it with more areas that are being opened out. It's sort of a problem because the modern development has crowded up the old town, but they keep it as a World Heritage site, and then they keep taking care of it now that it's been sort of dug out of the ashes with the old pavement, the old storerooms. I don't know if you've never been there. It is quite an experience, though. It's, again, in the summertime, it's pretty full of people, and you can only see a fraction of it. For instance, the tile work and the other elements of it have actually been removed to other museums, but they keep finding more. But it definitely is a ghost town, and you can imagine the life that went through it. Then one day a great volcanic plume just killed everybody, and then it was all buried and somewhat preserved. Now the Italian government considers this such an important place that they continue to sort of find more areas for excavation if they haven't been already been built on. For instance, this is a church that was bombed in World War II that is now just in the town that's been rebuilt. And the architectural site, though, includes what's now Heraclium, another outlying suburb that has more of the ruins. Now, this is still a danger because Vesuvius, like Mount Etna, are still considered active volcanoes, and there's some 500,000 people living around the area that this could easily happen again. So we hope not, but meanwhile they continue to, sort of preserve what they can, and hopefully it'll be there for a long time. They've been doing computer models so they can recreate digitally somewhat what it used to look like. But meanwhile, the most remarkable things are the tile work and some of the other ruins that they keep finding. I don't think my picture got in here, but there was a picture in the paper just yesterday of a new excavation. They found a full skeleton who had been running away, and a giant boulder landed on top of this person. And so my computer didn't take the picture, but it was a sort of the dramatic moment. They just, after 2,000 years, they found out that the fellow had a bad leg because of some disease and couldn't run fast enough to get away from the volcano. Well, may we all be better runners in due time. These are the famous, victims that were encased in the ash. There it is. That's the picture I meant. I did get in. My computer didn't like to get a new picture at time. But that boulder fell on the guy's head, it seems. Anyway, that's the latest finding of just this recent time here in Pompei. But if you go, you'll get to see some of it. There are, again, a lot of the most valuable mosaics were removed for conservation. But there's still graffiti on the walls, and you can see what life used to be there. This is a computerized reconstruction of the site. So nowadays you can get books that you can say, it looks like this, a pile of rock, but it used to be this. So it's getting more illustrated as time goes on, and they know more about it. Well, that's what happened. It sort of looks like Hawaii in a way, but it's a different kind of volcano. But again, people are still living in the shadow of that, and we we may get a little view of Stromboli, which is the volcano down just to the south in the sea. This is one of the stadiums that they just excavated also. Now, the Sorrento Peninsula south of Pompeii and Naples is, well, for many centuries, such a beautiful place. The cliffs over the sea and the overlooks and the little villages down on the shore and then the offshore islands. So this is one of those excruciatingly beautiful parts of Italy, which again has most, there are people who've been from there, but many of the houses are built and owned by people from the cities in the north and international clientele. But it's sort of magic light and seascapes. Now this again is Vesuvius, so you can see that, that's Sorrento right there, Amalfi is about there, that is the island of Capri, and then that's the Gulf of Naples out there. And so this is a pretty dramatic geography, and it may happen again. They hope they can evacuate people in time if the rumbling gets so, but it's very unpredictable. And of course, it's happened every couple of centuries. There's been some explosion on Vesuvius. This actually out of the caldera of the current volcano. I don't know if the ship is offering trips to Capri because it's quite a bit of a trip out to it, but that, if you haven't been to that island, it's considered one of the most beautiful islands in the world because, again, it's high mountains on the sea with all kinds of inlets, little villages and such. And so you take a boat out of Napoli or Sorrento, and then you go out into the string of islands with the sort of the pinnacles out there in the water. And so it's been a resort island ever since the Roman Emperor Tiberius built one of his many mansions up there. And so you can go all the way up into the height of the mountain and visit his old overlook. Meanwhile, there's the towns which are pretty steep walking. I mean, you get off the ferry boat and you walk into the little fishing town and the marina, but everything else is pretty steep. And so they have built a funicular nowadays, but people would go to Capri just to go enjoy the view and the air, and then it was particularly famous for painters who would come and paint some of the local people and some of the scenes. And it's still to that day, the quality of the light is so dramatic with the sea and the sky and the mountains reflecting the light that it, again, like many places, is sort of overfilled with people and can hardly maintain let's say, services for all the people that come. Now, this is the overlook from the Emperor Tiberius's garden, which then became the home of a Swedish consul, and now it is an art museum. But features works like this, these sort of Italianate landscapes, which often feature the view that you can see right out your portico or on your boat. So then the most famous thing to do when you've gone up into the heights and all and seen the dizziness of up there is once you take the funicular, which makes it easy now. You don't have to go up on a donkey anymore. But from the heights, then there's another view down deep, which is the famous Blue Grotto. And so if you take a little boat in at low tide, you can go into this sea cave, which is called the Blue Grotto because with the intense sunlight outside, the whole cavern sort of radiates a blue color. Well, now I'm going to go on to Sicily, which is, of course, the next stop for the ship. This is not quite as big as Sardinia, but you can see that it's right close to Calabria and the southern boot of Italy, so it's had a lot more commerce and development over the centuries than Sardinia. And it sits right in the middle of the convergence of the eastern and western Mediterranean, so therefore it again has had all the kinds of trading posts and battles and conquests and kingdoms over the centuries. And now it is part of the nation of Italy. Though the Sicilians, like the Sardinians, think they will never call themselves Italians unless they are asked a little further. They're Sicilian first and then part of the bigger world. And here's a curiosity of Italian modern history. In 1947, there was a referendum in Sicily to secede from Italy and join the United States. And the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government said, no, we don't want any islands in the Mediterranean, thank you very much. And so Sicily, which had a bad history with, let's say, especially Mussolini, stayed with Italy anyway. It's not quite big enough to be its own country, but anyway, we're going to Taormina, which is not on the map, but it's right there, just south between Messina, Mount Etna, and Catania. But you can see it's a pretty big island. Sometimes we go over to Trapani, or of course Palermo is the capital in the bigger city. But Etna is the big volcano that is the center, and there's rugged mountains up in the top, but they're big, broad agricultural plains all through the south, especially. And so it has a beautiful coast and a number of different harbors, Syracuse, Ragusa, up and around. So it's a very variegated island with only Palermo is a big industrial center. So you have a lot of interior villages and you have coastal towns. And again, it's become an economy of as much tourism as agriculture. I have a friend in New York who just bought himself a village. He decided he wants to retire in the mountains. So where we're going, though, is Taormina on the east coast, which is, again, a kind of a big rise out of the sea. The hills around Mount Etna rise up pretty dramatically. So Taormina has a lot of this kind of shell beaches and cliffs and seascapes, and again, resorts, not much industry. It's actually a place where people then go hiking out of up onto from the beaches up into the highlands. This is one of the nature reserves. Then if you dare, go all the way up into Mount Etna. But this coast is very dramatic, partly because it's had a lot of volcanic activity and uplift, and I mean, this is a geologically dynamic part of the world, I'd say. And then in the back country, you can see it's sort of this wide valleys and village after village. There's Mount Etna.